Hey, Wellspring, thanks for watching this. Hopefully you're in a life group. If not, you're watching it sometime after. We're in the middle of a series called Grownish, and where we're looking at Matthew 18 and talking through how to grow up in the faith, how to be mature Christians in the faith. And so wanted to have a discussion around conflict and invited two of the most mature people I know. And so Pastor Ritter is my pastor from Bayside Chapel. He was the one that prayed me into this position, and God put on his heart to plant churches up and down the Garden State Parkway, and here we are, Wellspring Church. And so even together, we have been through conflict, not personally, but like we have navigated through. And then also Laura, who sits on our elder team as a deaconess, bringing that perspective to the team, and is somebody that we have walked through together, navigating conflict before, and even still, like there have been times where we've disagreed, and we have been able to lovingly speak truth in love and walk through things together. And so, also I'll be representing Dr. Neuenhouse, who's my counselor, somebody that we support as a church and send people to. So I'll be sharing something from him as well. But Pastor Ritter will be sharing a perspective on leadership. I asked you to share a perspective on just kind of general conflict. And then I'll share some stuff from Dr. Neuenhouse in the realm of marriage. And so really for our life groups, we'll just start with Pastor Ritter, have him share kind of 4 key points that he thought of that if you're in leadership or aspire to be in leadership, some things to consider. Chew on a few things, and then we'll pass it over to Laura, and together chew on a few things as well. So cool.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Jason, for this opportunity. So when it comes to leadership, very often a leader is going to find conflict arising when somebody approaches him or her and has a complaint or is saying, I disagree with this decision that you made, or I disagree with this direction, or any number of grievances that they may have. And so my first observation about how to deal with conflict is listen to learn, not just to reply. And what I mean by that is that our first instinct when somebody comes at you with a complaint is to already start formulating in your head how you're going to respond back to that. And what you miss in that is to learn what's really at the heart of the grievance or at the heart of the complaint. Mm-hmm. That there might be something legitimate that you need to pay attention to, but if your frame of reference is always to defend and to be ready to come back with an answer for whatever grievance or complaint is raised, then you're not going to really hear the heart behind what's being said. What I find is that oftentimes the complaint that is being brought to you is not the real issue. Mm-hmm. And you need to listen to what's really behind that, and perhaps ask some clarifying questions so you really understand. So listen to learn, not just to reply. Second observation is own what you have contributed to the conflict. So if you find yourself in conflict with people that you're leading, or with coworkers, or with a constituency that you serve, and people are unhappy and they're fussy and they're angry, I think one of the important things is to do some introspection and say, is there some way that I legitimately contributed to this mess? Mm-hmm. Very often as leaders, again, if we're in that defensive mode, we tend to think that, well, I'm not to blame. Somebody else is the problem. And so we're looking outside for, who the real issue is, what their problem is. But oftentimes, there are very few conflicts that are totally one-sided. Everybody in the conflict has probably contributed something to it. And so I, as a leader, need to, own up to, if I contributed to that conflict, I need to own up to that. It's not easy to do. But if I'm willing to own up to my part in the conflict and do that with, integrity and in a non-defensive way, it kind of opens the door for other people to do the same thing. Mm-hmm. To say, you know what, I probably was at fault too, And then we can all get somewhere in terms of getting the thing sorted out. Observation number 3 is state your commitment to do things better and or differently. So, all right, so I've owned my part of the conflict. that's like saying, well, I'm sorry that happened.
Yeah, sorry you feel that way.
I'm sorry you feel that way, or I'm sorry if you were offended.
Yeah.
Which is really a non-apology.
Yeah, it's not.
But if you go to the point of saying, you know what, I can see that I contributed to this in this manner, and here's what I promise to do differently going forward so that this doesn't happen again. Mm-hmm. That gives people confidence in you as a leader, that you're growing, that you're not stuck in one defensive mode, that you always have to be right. But it shows people that, you know what, this is somebody we can trust, because he's taking things to heart and she's willing to grow. And then the fourth one, which I think is really important, and that is treat conflicts as problem-solving opportunities. So if you find people are fussing with each other and there's a conflict brewing, I find that it really takes the wind out of the conflict if you can say, hey, you know what, we've got a problem. Mm-hmm. Let's figure out exactly what the problem is. And then let's talk about how we can solve it together. Mm-hmm. Because when you do that, you remove people from being adversaries, taking sides and gathering ammunition to hurl at the other side. And you invite everybody to be part of the solution. Mm-hmm. You invite people into the conflict in a constructive way to say, all right, this is our problem. We all are in it together. How can we solve this? And then especially if, as a leader, you're taking seriously the input that's coming from the group. That again is a huge confidence builder, because it says we're being listened to, we're being heard, and yeah, maybe I'm not going to get everything I want in terms of the outcome here, but I can live with this because I was part of the solution. Mm-hmm. So those are four things over the years that I've found helpful when it comes to being a leader and helping the organizations I lead to manage conflict. Mm-hmm.
I remember when I was a youth pastor on your staff, I forget if it was a conversation coming my way or a conversation we were handling. I remember you saying, like, if God can speak through a donkey, I may not always like the source of where something is coming, but God can use any source to speak truth at me. Mm-hmm. And to that first point of like, listen, learn, like take there. I might throw away 95%, but there might be something there that God is saying, here's the nugget you need to hear.
Yeah. Listen to that kernel of truth that you need to hear.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because no leader's perfect. I mean, we're all growing. Basically there are leaders that are learning and growing, and there are bad leaders. Only two kind of leaders there are.
Yeah.
So if I can lean into a conversation with somebody that I don't necessarily agree with, or I think maybe they're being really unfair, but I can listen long enough to say, you know what, is there something here I need to pay attention to? Yeah. It just might be that God is using a donkey to to help me wise up.
Yeah. And I can, like, the brainstorming part connects with me as you're saying that, because recently we've had conversations on a leadership level about like, hey, like we have messy people that come through our doors, and like in talking about that, like sometimes we can try to like shut the door to messy people, but in trying to brainstorm, we came to a really good of like, okay, no, how do we push people in all of our messes collectively, push people forward? And with that brainstorming process helped us say like, okay, the messy person is not the problem. It's how we, anyways, like that really connects with me to try to collectively get to the heart of what's being discussed. So what, from your experience, what's a positive example of one of these points in action?
Well, I'll kind of use a generic example. One of the things in a church staff that is often a point of contention is usage of space, right? Space is limited. And down through the years, there have been a number of times when you find out that, I was planning an event for a particular room, but another staff member's already reserved it, and their event isn't nearly as important as mine, and that's how we tend to think. And so you find staff kind of sometimes getting crossways with each other and fussy. That's the moment to pull out hey, we've got a problem. Let's identify the problem. Let's solve it together. Let's figure out how to solve it. And typically, that could remain as an undercurrent, a sort of resentment. He wouldn't give up that room for my event that's more important than hers. But if you invite people to the table and say, look, we got a problem. Two of you want that same space, and you both can't have it at the same time.
Yeah.
So how can we work this out?
Yeah.
And by inviting people to come together in a problem-solving manner, typically you find that they're much more willing to give way to each other, to help each other out, to offer alternative suggestions about, well, I guess I could meet this time and you could have it that time or whatever. It's more when you don't have those conversations that the conflicts will fester and kind of under the surface. You know?
And both at the table where you're not like, I'm over in this room talking, okay, now I'm going to come over here. And it's like together,
that's
you're
right.
both humans. Like,
together we're going to solve this. Yeah.
What's a negative example of like, okay, you made one of those 4 points. What's the antithesis?
I think one of the negative examples I'll pull is there have been times down through the years, I don't know if I might have done this with you even, I'm not sure, where it happens a lot with youth pastors and children's ministry directors, where something happened at youth group and a parent calls the boss. Mm-hmm. Parent calls the senior pastor, right? And immediately, the tendency is to want to pacify the parent and say, "Oh, wow, didn't know that happened. I'll look into that for you." You know, and then you go to the staff member, and the staff member's like, "Why didn't they talk to me?"
Yeah,
they should have talked to me first. Mm-hmm. I could have explained to them what happened, or I would have handled that. Mm-hmm. They didn't have to go over my head. Mm-hmm. And so, one of the things I've had to do, and this is kind of comes along with that idea of state your commitment to do things better or differently. Mm-hmm. There have been times I've had to say, you know what, I shouldn't have listened to that complaint. What I should have done was ask right up front, have you talked to that person? Mm-hmm. Have you talked to her about this? Mm-hmm. Because more often than not, they'll say, well, no. I wanted you to know you're their boss. And my explanation would be, well, Matthew 18 says, go to that person first. Don't go over their heads. It'll go a lot better for you. It'll go a lot better for that staff member, go a lot better for me if you go talk to them first. And to own that and say, you know what, I blew it. I shouldn't have listened to that complaint and then come down on you. I should have pointed them to you first. By stating that I understand that I blew that, and here's what I'm going to do differently in the future, I think that would give the person who should have dealt with the complaint, give them greater confidence that their boss has their back. Yeah.
You never did that with me. You would actually do what you were saying earlier, is you'd invite the parents and me to the table, and really just navigate through a
There were times, a lot of times, it kind of, again, going back to Matthew 18. My preference would be, parents, you go talk to the youth pastor, get this sorted out. Mm-hmm. If it doesn't get sorted out to your satisfaction, then come back and the four of us will sit down together. Yeah. And so that might be what you remember.
When you think through the 4 things you suggested with leaders watching, life group leaders specifically, and other ministry leaders, what would you anticipate being the hardest point to gravitate towards or really own up to?
I think that first one of listen to learn, not just to reply. And the reason why that's the hardest is because it happens in the moment, right? Mm-hmm. And it often happens at the worst possible moment. So, you just finished preaching, and your brain is a pile of mush, and somebody comes up and starts putting their finger in your face and complaining about something that happened or something you did or something somebody else did. And because it's catching you at the worst possible time, in the flesh, you just want to answer back, right? And smack them down. But to just take that deep breath and pause and say, okay, what do I need to hear in this? And maybe the best response is to say, you know what, I'm having a hard time concentrating on this right now because I'm just brain dead from having preached. So can we talk about this Tuesday? And postpone it so that you can come at it a little fresher. But I think for me personally, that's the hardest of the 4 that I just laid out there. Having the wherewithal to kind of take a step back and not not be listening to, okay, here's how I'm going to come back at them.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And in those settings where if you're truly willing to have a conversation on Tuesday, I think it's both helpful for you, obviously mentally, but also that person, time will diffuse what they're hot about.
Right.
And so it helps.
Yep.
All right, Laura, similar, we'll say this at the end, like there's similar themes throughout this, talking more from like a lay person, conflict among group members or church people, whatever it might be. What would be the four things that you would bring to the table of like things to focus on?
Well, let me just preface this by saying that I grew up in a household that did not do conflict at all. I never saw it modeled. I never saw it worked through. I never saw it resolved. So much of conflict that I grew up into was when I became a Christian, because so often I never saw it handled well, if at all. So much of the things that I've learned were later in life. And I observed a lot of people that I admired, and I saw how they handled stuff. So much of conflict resolution that I'm still learning about, I haven't even gotten there yet, but at least things I can apply that's been helpful and will continue to hopefully grow in this, because I think everybody can still grow, even if you think you have, the 4 steps. It's like, then there's 4A and there's 4B, and it keeps going on and on. So anyway, so one of the first things I do every time that there is a conflict with my peers, because I think, Jason, you asked about peer conflict.
Yep.
And one of the things that I always try to think about is, even if I don't feel it, I go to the scripture in Philippians where it said, let nothing be done out of strife or conceit, but in humility let each esteem the other better than himself. And that's Philippians 2, verse 3. And so I think if I go in with that mindset, I'm already a lot less defensive, because we're told to consider one another higher and better. So the 4 steps that I kind of jotted down that have been helpful is timing, which is kind of the idea of, try to be the first to reach out if that makes sense for the timing. But if needed, also step back, pray and seek wise counsel if needed, but no gossip. Go to trusted advisors saying, look, I'm having a really hard time with this person. I'm like, and a lot of times it will be somebody that I trust, that I can seek counsel for. And also, to Pastor Ritter's point, is in that timing and stepping back and thinking about things is hearing what is not being said, because so often things are said and then, well, what are they not really saying? Because we get so caught up in the positive, we don't see the shadow part that fills things in. So for me, it's a timing thing. And as somebody who has always been very impetuous and always been very emotionally driven, it's really been hard for me to take my time. I feel like I have to answer something immediately, and that's not right, because when you do that, then the enemy can really have a foothold in that, because then I'm not leaning upon the Lord, I'm leaning upon my own anger or frustration. So because in Proverbs it talks about whoever is slow to anger has great understanding, but he who has a hasty temper exalts folly. And that's from Proverbs 14:29. And I was a hothead. I made Ricky Ricardo look like an altar boy. So, just timing in that, and so I've learned to temper and to listen, as Pastor Ritter had mentioned already. The second thing I do is seek clarity in the heat and smoke. And I love history. And one of the things they talk about in Civil War battles that people don't realize is that in the battle, there's a lot of noise, smoke, confusion, and you can get lost in the heat of that. And so one of the things that I've kind of learned is not to be disoriented by that. And don't confuse emotions or feelings with truth. It muddies what is really at the heart of the conflict and the spiritual matters that need to be addressed. So a lot of times people can tell you something, but that's not really the heart of the issue, and so don't confuse that, because feelings, I think we live in a very feeling culture. I feel this. I'm emotional. I can't control it. It's what I do. And, so yeah, we all have emotions, but it shouldn't drive the bus into how we deal with things. It informs us, but it shouldn't drive us. So that's one thing that I think has helped me to kind of sit with the Lord and help me to sort stuff out. Is it like, am I just feeling this? And like, what is beyond that? So, and God says, like in James, it says, if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given to him. So, and that's in James 1:5. And it talks about, I don't know sometimes what the truth is. So I have to pray for wisdom and ask for wisdom, because in myself, I don't know. And then my feelings get hurt. And then, I get all like crazed. And it's like, and no conflict has ever been, sorted when the emotions are running high. Usually it adds just gasoline to the fire, And the third thing I do is ownership. So basically self-examination before any conversation is key to see if there's something going on with me that I need to look at. For example, are my buttons being pushed? Am I overreacting? Am I deflecting? What is about my sin maybe that's, I'm ashamed about and I don't want it to come out? So a lot of it is just looking at your own sin and your own, I don't know, whatever it is that maybe you have a problem with, but you're projecting it onto somebody else. Because that happens a lot, and obviously the really famous, scripture about that is in Matthew about, you hypocrite, take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. And also in Psalms, the psalmist talks about, look deep into my heart, God, and find out everything I am thinking. And if there is any way of iniquity in me, and lead me in an everlasting way. So it really does slow me down, stop playing the blame game, and then start to maybe see if I'm contributing, like Pastor Ritter said. Is there something am I contributing to this? Because Jason famously told me, even if you're 99% right, there's that 1 or 2%, you're 90%, if that, you're at fault. So there's nobody that doesn't come to the table without something going on. And the fourth thing is, make restored fellowship the end game, if at all possible, which is, kind of coming to the place of confessing our sins to one another, seeking forgiveness. Hopefully restoration and unity will be, the end game on that. Even if you don't agree, you can still be united and disagree. And that's okay. It's fine.
Wait, does that mean we don't all have to agree on masks and vaccines and we can still be friends?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Good.
Absolutely. We don't have to hate one another. And then sometimes if it's really hard to talk to somebody because there's still so many emotions, sometimes ask for mediation, ask for another friend to step in that's impartial, that says, hey, I hear you guys are having a lot of trouble. Can you help us sort it out? And sometimes just a third party who's impartial can see things that you're not seeing because you're so caught up in something. So all those things are things that I have gleaned and tried to apply. I would like to think that I'm getting better at it, but I'm still, it's hard. Conflict is hard because it exposes you and it makes you maybe not loved and unpopular, and it's hard, but in the end of it, I've had friends that I had many conflicts with over the years, and they're my best friends because we've come out stronger. We've come out more like Jesus, and we've learned to forgive, which is the heart of the gospel. So those are my little 4 points, which is somewhat similar.
Yeah.
To
there's
what
definitely
Pastor
things.
Ritter said. Just he said it better, but but it's the same thing. Really, and it doesn't matter if it's a leadership thing, a peer thing, a marriage thing. All sin is common. So, and it's all about the same process. But, we think there's distinctions, but really it all comes to the same kind of process.
Yeah. Well, and the seeking clarity part, and I'm almost asking this from the standpoint of like internal clarity, like before I go and say like, hey, so-and-so, you offended me or you sinned against me. How would getting clarity within my own spirit, how does that help the process? How does it even potentially end the process before it starts?
Because you own what is yours. Because I think a lot of times in conflict, you want other people to carry what is yours. And I think so what happens is that those encounters become burdensome because I'm expecting somebody else to carry what I should be carrying or I should be confessing. So I think clarity helps to see who owns what after the smoke has cleared. So for me, that's always been something. And, Jesus didn't respond a lot of times when he was questioned or asked. He just sat a lot of times in quiet. And I love that. Everybody in this culture and in this time period hates quiet. They hate that solitude of not having a quick answer because 30-minute sitcoms, it's snappy answers and blah blah blah. And I think for most of us, we fear that because in that, then we'll be exposed what our own sin is or what we need to deal with. So I think clarity can also mean just being quiet. And coming to the Lord and saying, Lord, what do I need to own in this? And you'd be surprised how much you own.
and like in the clarity portion too, it's I think there's a moment where we have to ask ourselves, like, did this person sin or am I just offended?
Correct.
Like I wasn't invited to the party. Well, maybe there was only 10 seats and like you would have been the 11th. So did the person sin or am I offended? And that, like the clarifying of like, all right, love covers a multitude. Like maybe this is just something to move on from.
And you don't have all the answers.
There's another verse that comes to mind too, and that's the one in Proverbs that says it's to a person's glory to overlook an offense.
Exactly. Correct.
So, all right, maybe I took offense, but it wasn't an intended offense. Or there was a reason behind, my not getting invited to the party. Is this something that's worth going to war over? And that's where I think the seeking clarity comes in. Taking a step back and maybe a day or so later saying, you know what, it's not that big a deal.
And you can diffuse it before it even starts. It's like, maybe it's not worth it. Because you get, mad at that moment. It's like, I'm thinking, and you sleep on it. And the next day you're like, man, that's so silly.
To your point, Instagram has you having insta feelings. Like you're feeling it right away.
The immediacy. It's the tyranny of the immediacy of the age that we live in. There's a text, I got to respond to it immediately. There's this, I got to respond to it immediately. And so it doesn't allow the luxury of time and clarity to be built in. And I kind of find myself resenting it sometimes, but it's like, nope, my choice, stand back.
Well, you mentioned the one about ownership and that being tough. I kind of want to skip down to your point about restoration. What does that truly look like? And I know there's moments where like there is genuine abuse and there has to be distance.
Well, it says if at all possible.
If
at all possible. And I think even Alcoholics Anonymous deal with that, seek forgiveness if at all possible. That can happen. But as long as I know on my end, there is no bitterness or hard feelings or hatred towards somebody, in my mind, that's half the restoration. It's up to the person then, after you have extended that, it's up to them then to respond back. But I cannot force somebody to forgive me. I cannot force a restoration or a reconciliation. The most I can do, because I've had relationships that have ended and maybe not on the best terms. And it's taken me a while. And so part of it is, reaching out even years later, writing something and saying, look, I'm really sorry. And maybe I never hear from that person again, but it doesn't matter. I did my part. So I think we don't want to hold each other hostage by saying, you better forgive me. That's between them and the Lord.
When you say, I need you to forgive me, that's more about you than it is about
Absolutely.
Absolutely. There's a place where Paul says it is to a person's, not that's the wrong one. Insofar as possible, live at peace with all.
Correct.
And so it does. Paul even recognizes that's not always possible.
You can't.
That's you're only responsible for your own responses. You can't be responsible for how the other person responds.
Absolutely.
And sometimes it's hard to come to terms with, but
it is.
Sometimes we have to leave it.
And we have to, and we have to ask again for wisdom and clarity of how far to go and how far then to say, all right, well, I'll leave them in the hands of the Lord. And that's what I've done with a lot of different over the years relationships.
But the ideal being what you said about your friends, where you've talked to each other, you've had conflict with each other, and you got stronger through it. I think that's restoration. The beauty of mutual restoration is the relationship does get stronger.
Well, we've been through stuff.
Yeah.
And we've had conflict just recently,
Yeah,
and we've
yeah.
worked it through. And
Yeah.
I have even more respect for you
Yeah, likewise. Yeah,
than I
yeah.
did before, because
Yeah.
it's like, hey, we can still, move on from
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. And like and the opposite, and I think we can all probably tell examples of this, of like, I know there have been people that for what seems very minor things, I forgive you, but I want nothing to do with you.
Right.
And that is, I can't control that. And it's just at some point I have to move on and say, I don't really like that definition of forgiveness, but it's not for me to.
Right.
Okay. So I want to read what Dr. Neuenhaus had said, and then just kind of ask us around the table here is just some questions about it. So he wrote these 4 things from the standpoint of marriage, and again, there is some similar themes through this. His first objective is limit the discussion, stay focused, and his point is to stick to one issue at the center of the conflict, and don't bring up the past. That the past hurts once they're forgiven. Love covers a multitude of sin. Love does not keep a record of wrongs. And his point in the heat of the moment, especially in marriages, one issue, and all of a sudden you're bringing in this, and this, to stay focused on the one issue at hand. His second point, and I emailed him to get clarification, each partner take 100% responsibility for conflict resolution. And that is that, okay, what he means by that is, like, it might be to what your point, like 99% wrong, 1% wrong, but at the end of the day, you're both coming to the table and you're both working on a resolution to it. That you might bring different wrongs to the table, but whatever the said resolution is, you're both giving 100% effort to that resolution, being open and honest, and that 100% bringing a win-win scenario. And then similar to the first point, he said attack the problem. So in this point, not like bringing in other problems, but don't attack the person. Attack the actual problem. And something that he's taught me in this, and I've learned through other counselors, is really trying to avoid the you statements. That when you're in a conflict, it really hurt me when I felt like it really hurt me when there was a lot of tension, and I responded this way because I don't react well to tension. Like trying to figure out ways to make a comment without saying you and putting that person on the defensive, because it's when you start saying you, that person is going to feel like they're being attacked instead of the problem. So not being derogatory, and not attacking the person, and clarifying your feelings so that the person isn't supposed to read your mind. And then lastly, work through anger constructively to forgiveness. He says Ephesians 4:26-27 recommends dealing with anger quickly. That there is times to agree and disagree, kind of something similar to what you were saying, not holding on to grudges. But then one of the things he mentioned in his email to me was expression prevents depression and anxiety. And that really, really struck me as a really key point when you're dealing with working towards forgiveness. That as I express myself, I'm understanding more of what I'm feeling. And also saying it out loud helps me understand, oh yeah, I'm delusional in this. Or, oh yeah, like this isn't exactly what I mean, or like, or whatnot. But then praying together for forgiveness afterwards to move forward. So limit the discussion, stay focused, each partner taking 100% of responsibility for conflict resolution, attacking the problem, and work through anger constructively to forgiveness. So just kind of an open question of, is this a helpful list? And if so, how?
Yeah, I think it's extremely helpful. And I think the most helpful one of the bunch is attack the problem. Mm-hmm. It's very similar to what I was saying about turn conflicts into problem-solving situations, where the first step is to say, okay, what's the problem here?
Yeah.
And let's get after that. Mm-hmm. Let's not get after each other, because that's where couples tend to go. Mm-hmm. They instead of taking time to think about, okay, what's the real problem here? Why are we having this conflict? They begin impugning each other's motives. You always do this. You always do that. Character assassination. And the reason you do this is because you're a selfish person, and and you're a cold person, you know, all kind of judgments get made. And when arguments go there, boy, those comments are hard to take back. You know, those are the ones that tend to cut the deepest, take the longest to heal. So, yeah, I really like his suggestion of attacking the problem, not the person. But that's a skill that has to be developed. It doesn't come naturally to most couples.
Yeah, and two, because in that he says or in one of these points he talks about giving voice to your feelings, basically, like reflect. You know, the person isn't a mind reader, and kind of subtly within that point, and you know, going that like if I am truly wronged and I choose not to go, then number one, the person can never change, and then number two, like there is that aspect. I think you've taught me this of like grievance gathering of then like I am offended or I am hurt. I don't say anything. The person does not change. And then here, and our minds are great to lay out for the last 5 years. I can lay out this, and this, and the person is like clueless because you've never attacked the problem.
In fact, that's one of the surest signs that you're on the verge of a conflict is when you find yourself grievance gathering. It's like storing up your ammunition for the fight because you know, the fight is coming and you're going to have plenty of bombs ready.
And I was part of union contracts in my last job, and there was 21 unions in the county, and working for Ocean County, and I used to sit sometimes in the negotiation rooms, and it was just interesting to hear the grievances that, because each contract's like 3 years, you know, in between. Sometimes they're 5 with the PBA, sometimes they're less. But and so all of a sudden, it's like all this stuff came out that they've been storing. So that's why a lot of these arbitrations need to take place, because there's such, you know, a backlog. And it's like, whoa, sort this stuff out. So keep short accounts, I think, is really in any relationship healthy. You know, keep it short and don't let it fester.
Well, he mentions the verse in Ephesians about don't let the sun go down on your wrath. And, you know, a good way to describe that is don't go to bed angry with each other, you know, especially in a marriage. Why? Well, because if you go to bed angry, then you wake up the next morning and you're still angry, but you don't even remember why, you know. And then that just builds the next day and the next day and the next day. So, yeah, keep your accounts short. Make sure that you know, things are good between us even before the end of the day. Yeah.
And for my wife and I, like we will sometimes go to bed angry, but we have a promise that we've kept to each other of like within 24 hours we're going to talk, because to one of the points I think you both actually made earlier of like not dealing with it emotionally. And for Ava and I, nothing good comes when we have emotional conversations, but we do need a promise to each other that this won't go beyond 24 hours, that we will talk rationally within a given time frame.
One of the things I tell couples in premarital counseling is, you know, you may have very different communication styles. You know, you want to get at this right away and get it solved. And I'm a slower processor. I need time to think it through. I don't even know how to answer you right now. And so my putting you off is not a way of saying I don't want to deal with this, but it's a promise to say, look, I need some time to think about this. Can I have 3 hours? Can I have 5 hours? Can we talk about this tomorrow? You know, at least the other person knows that it's going to get resolved. It's not going to just stand out there forever. That you're listening and you're paying attention. You're taking it to heart, but you need some time to process. And I think when partners can understand each other's styles that way, it helps a lot too. So I sometimes coach, often it's the husband, to coach them to say, look, I know that you're upset. I know that we need to deal with this. I need some time to think about this. Is it all right if we take a time out and come back to it and you know, and give them a time?
That you will keep. Be trustworthy. All right, so two more questions as we wrap this up is, because this last list came from Dr. Neuenhaus, I think this is slowly going away in society, but it's not quite there yet. 2021, there is professional help out there. Mental health is in the media, in the news, and is truly an important thing, you know, aspect of society, and getting worse and worse. Why is it important for individuals and married couples to embrace seeking professional help? Why would that be important?
I think sometimes, you know, we need outside influence. I think for married couples because especially with lockdown, they were together a lot more than they probably would have normally been. There wasn't the escape routes that people
Healthy,
can typically
natural, yeah.
get out of the house. So I think that you're kind of stuck with each other. And then I think it could be a catalyst then problems will come up because of all the time is spent together. And so it could be a good opportunity, because maybe things were being avoided or things didn't come out. So I think seeking professional help is always good because first of all, it's impartial. They don't have, a horse in the race. They don't care. So they're going to be able to hear both sides and offer counsel on both sides if there really are good godly counselors. Because then again, all the steps that we all kind of wrote about, that's the push. It's for godly counseling, So I think it's important.
Yeah.
And I think when it comes to married couples in particular, look at it as not so much as counseling, but as coaching.
Yeah.
Right? Because none of these things come naturally to a couple. Staying focused, staying on topic, taking 100% of the responsibility, attacking the problem, not the person, working through to forgiveness. Our natural tendencies are to dredge up old stuff, to blame each other, to attack, and to hold grudges. That's what comes naturally, and hopefully if you're growing in Christ and not living in the flesh, you're going to overcome some of these things just by your growth in Christ. But even at that, I think having a trustworthy counselor to coach you through and help you realize when you're doing it and how to do it differently is really valuable. So one of the things I like to say, again, to couples in premarital counseling is, look, one of the reasons I'm making you go through 4 sessions of premarital counseling is so you have some kind of experience working with a counselor so that you'll have, hopefully, a good enough experience with this that when you hit a rough patch, instead of getting at each other and making the problem worse, you'll say, hey, you remember when we did premarital counseling with Dave and he told us go to a counselor sooner rather than later? Because the problem with a lot of couples is they wait way too long. And a lot of times by the time a Jeff Newenhouse sees a couple, it's like all over but signing a divorce papers. So I'm not speaking for Jeff, but I'm sure he would appreciate if y'all would come in and talk
Earlier.
to him, sooner rather than later.
100%. And then kind of just last question. I mean, we'll probably put this on YouTube. Other people will watch it, but our main focus in bringing us to the table was for our life groups to speak through conflict. It's a lot of peer on peer. It's a lot of married couples coming together and whatnot. And in talking about Matthew 18, oftentimes when sin creates conflict, it always does, our life groups might be on the forefront of somebody who has unrepentant sin. It's been one person, there's been 2 or 3, but now it's going to a larger body to seek after the person that is in sin. Any just kind of last minute advice that you would give to a life group that is together collectively in a larger group seeking after somebody in unrepentant sin?
I think it would be to observe, see for a little bit kind of what's going on, see patterns. And I think I would, like I've done in some of my life groups, approach them as my friend and say, have conversations on the quiet, talk about observations that I've made and seeing how this now affects their life. And is that something that they want to continue in? Do you see like there's a conflict? Just to have conversations, I think, on that starting point and hear what they have to say. Like listen to what they have to say and figure out what it is that maybe is the heart of the matter. And, and helping them along and have other trusted people. It's not just one person's job.
Church.
It takes a church to help people, and it shouldn't be up to one person. It's dangerous on one hand, and it's also it leaves you vulnerable. And I think you need accountability in that type of situation. So I think accountability is really important. And then follow up. What have you done? What are the things that you're doing? We've talked about this. Maybe let's, meet once a week. Let's read this book. Let's look at this, video, or let's do this devotional. So something that would encourage them along the way. And you're with them in that process.
Cool.
Yeah, and I would say if you're in a life group and you find that you're the one they're coming after, your tendency is going to want to be to say, they're judging me, and then to push away. But what you need to realize is that if you have somebody in your life who cares enough about you in Christ to come to you and say, we're really concerned about what we see happening in your life, that's not judging, that's loving. That's them saying, we care about you too much to just let you wander off into sin and mess up your life. So I would say, first of all, if you find yourself in that situation, don't take it as your life group members are judging you, but take it more as a demonstration of their love. And you may not appreciate it at the time, but down the road, if you come out the other side and you begin walking with the Lord again, you'll be grateful for that involvement in your life. The other thing I would say is keep the circle of involvement only as small as it needs to be. In other words, something is going on in the life of a life group member, and 3 of us in the group know about that. Well, that doesn't become a matter of prayer concern for all 20 people in the group, at least not initially. Initially, it becomes a matter of concern and prayer for those 3 people who then maybe go to the life group leader and they approach the individual. And, if it can be resolved, in just that small group, all the better. Nobody needs to know about another person's sin unless it's affecting, the whole group. And so you keep the circle of concern just as small as you possibly can, unless, it really is unrepentant and now it's starting to affect the whole group. Then, by your own hand, you're kind of drawing more people into the controversy. And the other thing I would just say is, when you're on the side of having to go after somebody else, that's, again, a very important time to check your heart and make sure that you're doing this in love and not with any kind of spite or judgment in your heart, but with a desire to truly see what's best for that person accomplished in Christ.
Yeah. Keeping the circle smaller will help with, ultimately, if your heart is, I want restoration, I want this person back in full fellowship, stronger and better, keeping that circle small will help. Making it bigger just complicates.
Makes it harder for the person to come back.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's very shaming.
Yeah,
Yeah.
very shaming. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys both. It's the time of this recording. We're getting into my bedtime, so I appreciate you guys making the time, coming to Tom's River. Both of you guys, you're coming from similar distances, so I appreciate that, and hopefully it's helpful to the life groups. So, thank you.
Happy to do it.
Boom. Thank you, Graham.